Yeah, it started recording.
Okay, sure. So hi folks. So this is part two for Tao, and so I'll just do a quick 5 to 10 minute recap on what we already saw last week, and then we can actually start looking at the architecture of how they built the system, right? So so this is Facebook's distributed data store for their underlying social graph. And we actually saw what the social graph is, right? So every Facebook page can actually be represented in terms of a graph with the objects as nodes and then the relationship between objects as edges, right? So the graph that we see over here on the screen is nothing but the representation for the Facebook page that's displayed above, right? Um, and given this fact, right, so what is the challenge that the team had, or what is the actual use case, right? So they have to, for almost every single Facebook page, that is being displayed for all the different users, right? So the paper kind of explains why they have to do the rendering of this particular graph dynamically almost for every single read request, right? Like, so because they have to apply a lot of filters, right? So they have to apply a lot of privacy rules, which are actually per user specific, right? And also customized to the user, right? So which means like they cannot pre-render these pages and cache the pages, right? They can still cache the nodes and the association between the nodes, right? But they can't actually cache the pages by themselves, right? So they have to dynamically render them every single time. That actually then leads to the big question as to, like what's the kind of reads, the read requests are we seeing, if we are kind of going to do something like this. And we actually saw that, like they actually have almost like a billion reads per second. And this was back way back in 2013. Right, so this is a new diagram that I added where in one of the some other videos related to scaling Memcache, which is actually their earlier system they had. They actually kind of show the read fan out that happens over here, right? Like, so it's actually a DAG, and a single request to for a particular page, leads to the exploration of the tree to this particular extent of the underlying social graph, right? So and they kind of say that it's almost like 500 is to 1, the read is to write ratio that they have to encounter for for this graph data store, right? So the use case, so in a high level, so the use case is like, so they have to render this graph data for almost every single page request that needs to be displayed, and they have to do this extremely fast for the social media experience, right? So latency is very important, and obviously availability like for social media related applications is extremely important. So they have to kind of go a little bit relaxed on the consistency. And they mentioned that they kind of guarantee eventual consistency, and they try to guarantee for the most part read after write consistency. And we can actually look into the architecture later as to how they try to achieve that, right? Okay, so given that we have this picture, and and we also the other thing to also keep note of the fact that the actual underlying data set that is there in this storage, right? It's like petabytes of graph data, right? Like of all these interconnected users and their posts and the comments and all the other entities that exist in the Facebook subsystem, right? Um, and so given that this is the use case, right? So what existed before, and what kind of, because they, I mean, they had a system that was working for them, right? So and they had this cache aside architecture where they were using Memcache, and the actual web servers, right? So application in this particular case, the actual web servers directly were interacting with the Memcache, using Memcache as a key value in memory store, and like, so it was kind of also interacting with the database if there was a cache miss, and populating the cache and stuff. So we actually saw a few reasons last week as to like some of the biggest issues that we're facing, right? So one thing had to do with like the way in which the list, the actual edges were being maintained inside Memcache, especially in terms of how to invalidate them in a much more efficient manner. And invalidating is actually a pretty constant or a pretty steady operation, right? So because so every time an association changes, there has to be a change in the association list as well, right? So they were actually having issues with efficient invalidation of those. And then also the other main thing that I felt was like what they explain as how the control logic think of the Looker side cache architecture is kind of spread across these web servers that were accessing the system, right? So they want to have a separate cache layer, through which all the read and write requests for the objects and associations went through, and that's also one of the main motivations. And there is also a third thing, which is basically, they kind of want to guarantee this read after write consistency, right? So, and in the memcached architecture, I actually took a look at the way in which they do it in their earlier systems. It's actually a little bit expensive because in order to guarantee this expensive read after write consistency, they would actually have to go across regions, in order to invalidate, and that is something that they actually avoid. They were able to avoid using this new architecture, right? So the idea is, so when you have to serve this much amount of read throughput queries, right? So when you have to search this much amount of read throughput, and you have to do it fast, right? And you have to be available, you probably don't want your reads spanning across regions, right? I mean, in a very simple sense, let's say spanning across data centers, right? So to keep the latency to the minimum. So that's one of their goals as well. And yeah, we saw the goals of Tao, and so this is how the write through architecture looks like. And um, we saw what dynamically rendering the graph, and we also saw what the actual data model, the underlying data model is, right? So so it's very simple. It's they just simply represent the graph using the nodes, which are nothing but the objects, and all the relationships, which are the edges in the graph, are nothing but associations, right? So we saw that, and we saw that, okay, fine. So how, okay, given that this is how, it's simply a set of nodes and edges, right? So how is that stored in the underlying MySQL table? And it looks like they simply have a table for objects, they have a table for associations, and those are the two main tables they have. They also have one for association counts, more like a materialized kind of view, but the main ones are objects and associations. Objects are nothing but key value stores for them, identified by the object ID, and as simple as that. An association is usually identified by three different entities, right? So one is the starting ID of the edge. The other one is the association type, because between two nodes you can actually have multiple associations of different types, right? So you also have the association type, and then you have the end node of the edge, right? So which is the ID2. So and the way they always store it is, it's always stored in the order of in the cache. It's always stored. So in the cache they store the actual association list itself, right? So which is like, given a specific starting node and then an association type. A simple example for that would be, hey, given a post ID, and then the association type could be comment, right? Like, so comments. So then you actually have all the comments as all the edges that are actually comment edges, right, to that particular post as your association list, right? So that's exactly how the information is stored in the cache. And this association list is actually stored in the decreasing order of time. So which means the latest data is actually stored first. And that kind of serves the way in which the queries would usually come, because like, if I want to display the post, usually the comments for the post, usually I want to display the latest comments first, right? So probably the first page in the comment section would always look at querying the first maybe 50 comments from the association list. Right, so that's how. And yeah, so they have this exact same thing. So where you have a post, and then you have this association called comment, and then you have these multiple associations that exist for that particular association type for that particular post. And yeah, we also talked a little bit about how they actually partition the data, right? So I think the very simplistic way to assume their partitioning logic is, they store an object ID and all the associations that start from that particular object in the same shard, right? So if you have a shard 1, and let's say there is an ID 1 object that is stored in the shard, then all the edges that originate from that ID, right? Because usually you want to always start from a node and then walk through the associations to figure out, hey, you know what, I start from this post ID, and then I want to look at all the associations whose source is actually this post ID, right? So they kind of co-locate that particular data together. And they say they have like hundreds of thousands of shards, like much greater than the total number of nodes they have in the cluster. And And then we also saw, yeah, they already have the 3 tables. And okay, so then, okay, so given that this is the nature of how the shards are, right? And there is one small thing that we would have to look at. So the way so each shard, right? Like, so because they use the same key for the shard, so both at the cache layer and the database layer, a shard at the cache layer would be equivalent to a shard at the database layer. So they maintain that one-to-one correspondence between a shard at the cache layer and the database layer. We'll actually see more about it when you look at the picture for that, but that's one small stuff. And I think we started seeing this this architecture last week, right? So our goal was, okay, so like, okay, in a system design, for example, right? So you have, it's the most simplistic diagram that we can draw. We have this database, and then it's a heavily read oriented database given the 500:1 ratio, and then you have the set of stateless web servers that are accessing the edges and the nodes in the database. So you implement a cache in between, and then that's like the first step, right? So both are sharded by IDs. And so we also had a brief look at what were the issues with this initial architecture, right? So like because so a couple of things that stand out very easily. One is the hotspots, right? So if you have this caching architecture like that, and let's say there is a specific shard that's really hot, right? Then all the web servers, right, like would a lot of these web servers, because it's a hotspot, would be actually accessing that specific shard, which is the hotter one, right? So that's one thing. The other thing is also the way in which the web servers communicate with the shards, right? So every time you add a new, when you want to expand your web server layer and you add a new node in the web server layer, what would happen is like for whatever shards that particular web server has to access to, it needs to kind of communicate with all the nodes in the cache, right? So that's why they say it's almost like a quadratic increase in the number of communication that happens for every single addition of node at the web server layer, right? So because the shards are spread across these cache nodes, and this web server would need to access any of these shards at any point of time based on the current page that it wants to look at, right? So there is this quadratic association that's coming, and there is also this problem of hotspots that we saw when we have this architecture like this. And one solution that they kind of implement in order to prevent this is something like this, right? So you the reason why they have this vertical partitioning of the web servers, right? So they have literally, if you guys look at it, right? So you have these layers. Now they're actually vertically partitioning both the web server layer and the cache layer, and you actually get this diagram. All right. So the reason they are able to kind of do it is because their natural deployment of their web servers itself are in terms of their front-end clusters, right? So there will be a group of front-end clusters, there'll be another group of front-end cluster, there'll be a front-end cluster 3 and stuff, right? So then they decided, okay, given that that's the nature of the deployment, we can actually have one complete cache tier for a specific cluster, right? So if you look at the first set of boxes over here at the cache layer, right? So that particular cache tier is complete in itself, which means that it can serve the request for any shard that is coming from the specific subgroup of web servers that we see on top, right? So similarly, you also have one more cache tier, right, that can actually serve the request for any shards, right? So, and then you actually have a very subset of the web servers that actually access that particular cache tier, right? So you're literally vertically partitioning it. So now you guys can actually see why that quadratic is now being brought down, right? Like, so any addition of nodes, let's say you want to expand the web server cluster, that's probably cluster 3, right? So that communication is actually just to the smaller set of cache that we have in the second layer, right? So that communication is kind of brought down, but there is a problem that kind of happens when you have the multiple caches accessing the database, right? So or multiple cache server nodes that are accessing the database, right? So that's basically.
Sorry,
Yeah.
excuse me, sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was not here in the last week, but I want to understand. So, by adding a node, do you mean adding a database node or adding web servers?
Adding a web server node.
So you mean those gray, like adding a set of those gray web servers? Is that what
Yes,
you're saying?
yes,
So
yes.
so we are adding that to divide the load, right? So how so it is actually dividing the load. So how is it creating a problem for us?
Yeah, so let's look at what happens when we add a node over here, right?
Mhm.
So when I add a node over here, so assuming the entire cache tier is one set of nodes over here, right? So when I add a node over here, the number of connections now this specific node has to make towards this cache layer increases by n,
Mhm.
right? Like so, because that specific node would have to contact almost all of these cache server nodes, right? Because it might actually have access to any of the shards,
Yeah.
right? So it increases by, that's why they say it increases in a quadratic manner, right? So in this specific case, right? So now we actually have a smaller set of web server clusters, and by adding a node to this smaller set, right? So the number of connections do not, so you still kind of use a similar number of nodes that you have in the cache layer over here, but it's already vertically partitioned, right? So now when you add it over here, the number of connections that at least like just looking at this diagram, it's kind of brought down by 1/3.
So we have divided the data in cache as well vertically. So if we are adding a web server node, it does not need to access all the caches, but only the caches which are for that piece of data, right?
Yes, only the caches that this particular web server tier is configured to look at.
Look
Yes.
at, yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
that's what, yeah. So that's one way in which this communication is helping us, right? But there's also one another way to look at this, right? So let's say, for example, how does it alleviate the hotspot, right? So previously, like in this, all the shards are distributed across these cache nodes, right? So which means that if a specific shard becomes a hotspot, then all the different observers will actually be communicating to that single shard in a single node, right? So but in this case, because each cache layer or each cache tier, like we have 3 cache tiers now, and each cache tier is self-sufficient to actually process the request, right? So if there is a shard that becomes a hotspot, that shard would actually exist both in the cache layer 1, in the cache layer 2, and in the cache layer 3, right? So the number of it would still be like a hard key, right? So whatever is being accessed in that particular shard, it will still be a hard key, right? But it's now spread across, being served by, instead of being served as a single node in the diagram 1, now it will be served by 3 nodes in diagram 2 in this particular architecture.
So basically, I'll be saying that basically we have replicated the cache, like in previous diagram, the cache was not replicated, and now we have 3 replicas, and each web server, we are saying that you just need to contact one of the replicas.
Yes. So the reason why we are not using the word replicas, because the contents of the cache are not exactly the same. It depends on what was accessed in that specific cache, right? But yes, but it's a complete,
Okay, okay, yeah, yeah, yeah. Makes
you
sense,
get
yeah.
that, right? So yeah, if it
Yeah,
is a replica, then it means it has the exact same copies, right? But in this case, it wouldn't be the scenario. It depends on what was accessed by the web cluster 1 and web cluster 2 and web cluster 3, right? So that
yeah,
defines what the contents of the cache in each of these 3 different cache layers are.
yeah, yeah. Okay, great.
But
Thank you so much.
but the concept is similar to replicas, right? You have 3 sets of cache tiers, each complete, right? Each can serve a complete set of requests for all the shards, right? So there is no need for a web cluster, for a node in the web cluster 1, for a web server in the web cluster 1 to actually communicate with any of the other cache tiers. It has to do is it simply communicates with its closest cache tier that is deployed to it, right? And then it would be able to get the read request or write request directly from that particular tier itself.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. Yeah.
Johnny, I have one doubt. So suppose we are following this 3 replica structure.
Yeah.
Now, in this case, we want the same user to go to the same cache, right?
We want the same user to go to the same cache. Yes. Yes.
So it would be kind of so there would be a load balancer before the cache, and that would be a IP hash kind of a algo.
Yeah,
right?
we'll actually, yes. So there are, yeah, I think, yeah. So your question, I can divide it into two things, right? So one is, yes. So why do we want it to actually go to the same cache? Because of the main reason that we want to guarantee a read after write consistency. We'll actually look at it a little bit later, right? But yes,
Right, right.
you're correct in the sense that we want it to go to the same cache server, and that is achieved. And the Tower system doesn't guarantee that, but it does a best effort to make sure that it actually does that. And that is achieved because, as we'll see later, the way this, as I said, the way this all, how does a set of nodes, like figure out which specific cache tier, like here, let's say, for example, if you're looking at the front end cluster 1, right? So how does the front end cluster 1 know to contact the cache tier 1 rather than cache tier 2 or cache tier 3? So I think it is kind of pre-configured, like for a set of for a particular cluster, that its primary cache tier would be this particular cache tier, right? So you kind of, it's almost kind of saying, you're doing a sticky cache configuration for this particular front end server. So any request that is coming from one of the nodes in cluster 1 would always go to the primary, for him the primary cache tier would be cache tier 1, and it'll always go to that. Yes, so you're kind of pre-configuring that information.
Okay, I guess yeah. So I had this doubt that there are, I don't know where I have read, but sticky sessions kind of a thing is considered to be anti-pattern, but I now got it. So the sticky could be at the cache level or before the web server, and this web server stickiness could be on the basis of location as well. So yeah, that makes sense.
Right. And here we are not actually sticking it to it's not like we are sticking it to a specific node, right? We are sticking it to a specific cache tier itself. We are sticking it to a specific cluster.
Right. Got it now. Yeah. Got it.
Perfect. Right. So, okay. So we have, so we came from this, like plain 3 layer, and then we did a vertical partitioning that kind of, like avoided, because, when we want to expand, it avoided the quadratic connections. It also, like the hard shots are not spread across, not in a single node in the entire cache, but it's now spread across multiple nodes. And as Abhishek pointed out, these are kind of replicas, but they don't exactly contain the same data, right? Depending upon the access pattern of what was being accessed from its corresponding front-end web cluster, right? So we have these information, and yeah. So the other, so the one of the main things that they actually have here, right? So now that we have multiple like independent multiple cache tiers, right, accessing the database, right? So then the problem that immediately comes upon is, what about thundering hertz, right? Because like, let's say there is a key that's being accessed simultaneously in all the 3 cache tiers, and there is a miss in all the 3 cache tiers. Then what would they do, right? They would all actually go and access the database to actually get a request, right? Like, so for a read request for the database, right? So that so both in terms of reads, right? Because reads could result in reads and cache misses could result in thundering hertz, and also the fact that like you have this if there are simultaneous concurrent write requests, right, like that are occurring, right? So then you have this write request being distributed across multiple nodes, right? So multiple concurrent writes are there, and the moment we have the multiple nodes accessing concurrent writes for a particular key, because a same shard could exist in all these 3 caches, right? So if you're, then there needs to be some kind of serialization before you actually write it to the database, or you need to have some kind of conflict resolution, right? So in order to avoid that, so the next step was, okay, fine. So we have this set of initial cache tiers, which is fine, and they call it as a follower cache, right? So they call it as a follower tier, where there you have like multiple clusters of follower tiers, right? So follower tier 1 and 2 and 3. But the follower tiers, instead of directly communicating with the database, right? So you actually have a leader tier that actually that represents that has the representation for the complete set of shards, right? So there is like one leader tier, right? You have multiple follower tiers, and there is one leader tier, right? So now you guys can understand how both the thundering hertz and the distributed control logic issue have been solved just by introducing this another layer of cache, which serializes the access to the database. It makes sure that there are not more than, it also does some kind of rate limiting. It makes sure that there are not more than, like certain number of outstanding requests for a particular shard onto the database. And like, so the entire control logic and the request rate limiting happens at that single leader cache. It also does the serialization of the writes. So there is no conflicts, write conflicts that actually happen over here. And what else? Of course, there are no thundering hertz, because like if all the same scenario where all the three follower caches, when they have a cache miss, right? So they would actually send it to the single leader. So the leader knows that so either it has already issued the request to the database to get that particular key using a lease, and it would not issue the multiple. The reason why all the three in the previous diagram they issued multiple reads was because they are not aware of what the other cache requests are, right? But in this case, because they are going through this one single leader tier, the leader tier knows that there is a pending outstanding request to fetch this data. So which means that I don't have to actually issue read requests for the same data coming from multiple cache tiers, right? So it would wait until it gets the data for the request it sends to the DB, and it would serve all the three requests coming from the three follower tiers using that thing, right? So you can basically see how both the read issue, which is basically the thundering herd, and the distributed control write issue, both are actually solved by introducing a single leader cache tier which sits in between the database and then the actual follower tiers that we have.
So Juni, I have one doubt. So we had this cache, it's not exactly the cache, but exactly the in-memory replication of the database, right? We were storing every shard in memory, right? That's what
the cache
is here,
yes. Yes.
here in this particular context, right? So
yes.
There would not be any miss, right?
Oh, so it's sorry again. So because these are caches, right? It's not an exact. You don't have the exact. I mean, you don't have all the data, right? Like, so the idea is to. I think they kind of say that they have a 90% hit ratio in the cache, right? So, but internally, they actually have an LRU cache implemented in each of these cache nodes. So it's not that.
Okay. So kind of a map for every shard, but it would be some smaller in size, right? As compared to the database shard.
Yes.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Basically, yes, caching all the hotkeys for the particular shard, right? Yes.
Got it.
Okay, so we have this architecture, right? So I think this is the final architecture, and we can actually see, right? So there are three different things. So it can coordinate the writes, and then it can protect against thundering hertz, and it also does another thing, right? So there is so when we have an architecture like this, right? So okay, let's look at this diagram, which is the previous one, right? So let's say there is this cache tier 1 that actually changes some object in shard 1, right? And then it actually writes that information to the database, right? So in that case, then in order to, what is one problem that you guys can see immediately when this happens?
There will be stale data in other cache tiers.
Perfect. Right. So because we know that all the three cache tiers, I mean, are their own independent representations of the database, right? So in which case, that particular key could potentially be in all the shards that are there in the other cache tiers as well, which means it would have stale data, right? So which means there has to be an invalidation that occurs, right? So every follower node, right? So, or every cache node in this particular scenario would have to send these invalidate messages to almost every other follower node in its own tier, right? So that kind of invalidation in this particular architecture now actually has a central control over here, right? So because the writes actually go through this leader cache. Now the leader cache knows that there has been an update. Right? So the leader cache job, now that invalidation logic completely falls with respect to the responsibility of the leader cache now. You guys get that, right? So you have a centralized place, like which is the leader cache that actually does the update to the database. It does the serialized updates. There is no conflict resolution that needs to involve. And because the leader cache is the one that determines that particular write, so it knows exactly how and when to update the follower caches, because it actually employs a little bit of different logic based on where the write originated. We'll actually see it later, where it actually does one synchronous update and then multiple asynchronous update to the other follower tiers. Right. So we'll see why that in a few slides down.
But
But, yeah,
I have one question.
sure.
Still, like leader cache has to do the conflict resolution, right? When concurrent writes happen on all the follower caches.
When concurrent writes happen in all the follower caches, right? Yes. So, but because it's serialized, right? So so the leader, so it, I mean, from the eye of the leader cache, all these concurrent writes that are happening in the different cache tiers, right? Like, so it kind of gets serialized at the leader cache level, right? So, which means that, if there is a write for a particular key to a specific value, and then later if there is a write for another write for that, right? I think it's simply an overwrite, right? So now it basically serializes that particular when it does the first write, it makes sure that it updates all the followers saying that, okay, fine, this value has changed into this, right? So, and then when it does the second write, it would actually update it to the new value. Right?
Would there be a congruent write use case in Facebook?
Would there be okay, so let's look at that, right? So would there be a concurrent write request in Facebook? So which means that, so what kind of data can be written, right? So, like, so maybe there is an association that's get deleted, or most probably most of these writes, actually we look at that later, right? So they are all, like in terms of objects, there are some changes to the property that these objects maintain, right? So it's probably, it's probably coming from a single user ID, right? So in which case, not many concurrent writes for the same object, right? Like, so
Yes.
can you guys kind of visualize that scenario, right? So if I'm kind of adding let's say I'm changing the check-in location or something, right? Or I'm kind of like updating, I mean, I'm kind of adding a comment, right? Like, so, or even if I'm editing a comment, right? So it's probably just updates to different sets of data, right? Like, so and what are the chances of the same data being updated by two different users?
So it seems like it is a not so usual use case. It could happen only when, say, suppose in a group we have posted something, and admin and the person who posted that might be working on the same comment, but admin can't edit that. He can simply remove it. So again, it is not the exact congruent right.
Yeah.
So it seems to be a rare scenario, I guess. Otherwise, it's the owner who is editing it, right?
So
Probably, yes. From the looks of it, it looks like, right? So unless we have a use case where it's more common. Yeah.
So I was thinking on a user post, if multiple people are commenting, isn't it a concurrent write on that particular user post?
So again, so that's the beauty of how this whole object and graph association looks like, right? So let's say you're adding a comment, for example, right? Like, so, and then let's say another person is adding the comment, right? So a comment is nothing but creating a new association between the original source and then the new comment, right? So I believe in this specific case, it wouldn't be like a conflicting kind of a write, right? So unless they are trying to modify the exact same comment, right? Because how does, okay, so let's translate it in terms of the graph structure, right? Like, so when let's say I am typing a comment, and then let's say you're also typing a comment, right? So how do these, and these comments are for a specific post, right? So, or maybe they are sub comments for one of the let's say main comment, right? So the way my comment and your comment would be added into the graph database would be, there would be an edge that actually, because I am writing a comment to the main comment, right? So there will be an edge from the main comment to my comment, right? So that literally defines what I did, right? I just added a sub comment to the main comment, right? And the exact same thing would also happen for your case, where, you know, like between your comment and the main comment, there will also be an edge, right? So to probably you know, like to display as to which comment should come first, it's usually based on the time, right? So it's usually based on the time at which those writes were done. So it's I mean it's more like, at least in this comment scenario, it's more like you know, addition of two new edges, you know, like from the main comment to creation of, first of all, creation of two comment objects. So that's there, and then addition of these two edges, right? So you create the objects first, two new comments, and then you add these two edges.
Yeah. So basically, in this case, I'm thinking the conflict is that merge both of the data. So merge the data from both, right? If for a user post, like there was one comment which added an edge for a user, and then there was another. So
yeah, so there'll be two edges now. That's it.
Yeah. So but for that particular node, for that user post, we have added two edges, right?
Right.
So if there is a conflict, like we will just merge, like take both of those values is how we will resolve the conflict.
I agree. Right? Yes. If there is a conflict, there has to be that kind of a way. But for the specific scenario that you are mentioning, right? So, so let's say like the user 1 and user 2 are both simultaneously trying to enter a comment, right? So, and when they in Facebook, when they actually, let's say I also, you know, like enter the comment and then I save the comment, and then user 2 also does that, right? So in Facebook, when let's say a minute later, when we reload the page, we should be able to see both the comments, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's why I said both the edges would be added, and that kind of reflects the correct scenario, right? Maybe which one comes first depends upon the time in which it was actually processed by the leader cache.
Yeah, so sometimes it happens that the comment which we have posted is shown top of the, you know, the second comment, but when we reload, it's the second comment which gets highlighted. You know, the order changes sometimes, right? It must be because of that particular situation.
Should be, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So are we going to talk about eviction in the below slides, or I should ask?
Yeah, so I think they simply mention LRU cache eviction, right? So and that's the only information that the paper talks about. So they use LRU to evict it, but they say that they maintain almost like greater than 90% cache hits. So the number of actual reads that actually reach that reaches the leader tier is less than 10%. And in fact, their empirical data even shows it further, right? The empirical table that they give actually shows that 94% of the cache of the data read access is being served by the follower tiers alone, and only 6% of them are misses that gets to the leader cache.
Okay, and is there any mention about it would be write through cache or some sort of policies are there, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So this is a perfect write-through cache. Yes. Right. So that's one of their building. That's one of the goals of building. Moving away from the Lucas-head architecture, and because.
So say suppose there is a update on the third tier of cache, and then it would update the leader cache as well, right? Now, would leader cache update the other follower caches as well, or
yes? So yes, so we are going to see a detailed slide on that, right? Like, so what is the actual read path and what's the actual write path here?
Okay, got it.
One more question. So let's say these follower caches are in different regions, and now if they have to contact leader cache, so they have to do those cross-region calls.
Right, exactly, right. So the question of, so right now we have not actually talked about those cross regions, right? Right now, we can simply assume that, you know, this entire set that we are seeing here is actually region 1, and it's all
Okay.
within the region. But yes, so we can actually see how, like, I think your question is very valid, because, like, we are building a system where we are kind of guaranteeing, such huge throughput, 1 billion reads per second with very minimal latency, right? In which we have to avoid the cross region calls as much as possible. And we'll see how the architecture supports that. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Sure.
If there is a miss in one of the follower cache,
Mhm.
so that key will be brought uh, in one of the cache, or it will be brought in other follower caches as well.
So if there is a miss in one of the follower cache, right? So that data would actually, the leader cache would actually deliver the data only to the cache that accessed it,
Okay, not to the other follower.
not to the other, right? So because I mean, it's difficult to predict how the pattern would be for the other caches, right? So there is more chance that that particular key might be accessed by the same set of servers that actually made the read request, which is coming from the front end cluster, right? So I think that at least we can say something about it, right? But we cannot say that that particular item would also be needed in the other two different follower tiers, right? So it just updates the cache from where it actually came from, the request came from.
Okay, makes sense, makes sense.
So during the write, it's going to update all the caches because it has to invalidate, right? But during
Exactly.
the read, like if it does not find that, then only that cache needs to be filled with that data, because other cache already might have that data. So it depends. Like if they need it, they will be
Exactly.
updated, or otherwise not. Yeah.
You guys are kind of, like predicting what's going to come later. So yeah, but that's true. I think it's exactly how it's going to happen. Yeah.
So, one question, Johnny.
Yeah.
So someone is commenting on a post, and the original author of the post tries to delete his post itself. Would that be a concurrency kind of scenario?
Yeah, I think that's what. Yeah, I think you found the scenario where there is a conflict, right? Like so what you're saying is, like, so I think a better the generalization of your idea is, I'm actually writing a comment to a post, and then the actual post itself is being deleted by the person who posted it.
Yes.
Right, that's where you're coming at, right? Yeah, I think yeah, I agree. So I think that would be, yeah, so they would have some ways to like figure that out, right? So probably the comment, so it depends on how it's being processed. So if the comment like came to the leader cache, let's say first, right? So then the comment gets added naturally and the post gets deleted, which is perfectly fine. But if the post gets deleted, so then the comment, addition of the comment would actually try to refer to an object that is now deleted, right? So I think that would result in an error scenario, right? So because you are trying to the association that I'm trying to add points to a source ID which is not there anymore in the system.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, I think they would have mechanisms to. They don't talk about that, but they would have mechanisms to, like, I mean, am I trying to create an association between a node that doesn't exist, right? So in that case, they would have error scenarios handling that.
Fine.
But the delete would have happened first, because the leader tier kind of takes care of the whole thing in a linear fashion, right? So the delete would have happened. So the delete didn't happen first, then we are okay. The comment gets added, then the delete happens, we are fine, right? But if the delete would have happened first, so then the actual object itself isn't there, the source object, and the association is trying to add and something related to that, right? So that would actually fail. Yes. All right. So, and even to the user, probably, like, let's say I'm typing a comment and then, to a particular post. So what would be the user experience at that point of time, right? Like, so the user experience should be, I'm trying to type a comment, but at the same time, the guy who posted it is almost deleting it, right? So the user experience should be that, either succeeded and then the post actually vanishes off, right? So because his comment actually got written first and then the post deletion he gets reflected after, or the post as he presses save, he actually gets an error saying the post doesn't exist or something. I've never faced that scenario on Facebook, so I don't know how they handle it at the user level, at the user experience.
But the comment is an object, so object has to be created first before deleting it, right?
Yes, but it would exist without the association, right? So they can't create that association.
But if
So-
it exists, then how the admin will be able to know that it is object? And then how
You mean
it?
it's a scale object,
Right. So how you
right?
can find out? Yeah.
Right. I think they would have ways to figure that out, right? Like, so they would have constant consistency mechanisms to actually check to check how this how they can figure that scenario, right? So where they have objects that are, these are objects that are there in limbo, right? They don't have they have been created and then they don't have any associations pointing to them, and then because maybe it's also because of the fact that deletion of a post, right? So if the deletion of a post should also take care of the fact that all the associations that are related to the post would be deleted, right? But in this specific race condition, we are talking about a scenario where the comment was created, but when we try to, because if we succeeded in creating the association, then the deletion of the post would take care of it. But we couldn't, we were not able to succeed in creating the association. So maybe at the user layer, they would be able to, at the web server layer, maybe they'll be able to figure that out, right? Because from the web server point of view, it would actually, like in order to add that comment to a particular post, what would the web server would actually send a set of comments to the cache tier, right? Like I want to create this object, and then I would also want to create this association, right? So the object creation would succeed, but the association creation would fail. Right. So the web server, I think, would immediately actually know about that failure.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, no problem. Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult to say how they implement it internally, but I believe because the web server, to the web server, submitting that comment means, like creating. Okay, it would issue a request to create that, as you mentioned, the comment object, right? So and then it will also create the association, right? So if that association creation succeeded, then the deletion of the post itself would make sure that the association gets deleted and all the relevant objects are deleted, right? But in the race condition scenario, the association creation would actually fail, right? So the web server would be aware of it, and depending upon the actual association type, the web server would actually know whether to create the originating object or not. Right? For comments, definitely, I think it makes sense for the web server to issue the delete on the object. For some other scenarios, when it tries to create an association and it doesn't fail, maybe it tries to create an association between user 1 and user 2. Let's say user 2 itself deleted his Facebook account. So in that case, user 1 should not be deleted, right? So I think depending upon what association type it is and what the source object type is, the web server would have the information to figure out whether to delete the created object, in this case, the comment.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we so far, so all we have seen is like we saw this three layered architecture. We saw how to vertically split it, and then we also saw the reason behind having a single leader cache, right? So now we can actually look at how this kind of plays out, in their deployment, this thing, right? So they have I think this diagram kind of talks a lot. So they have this they have a region, so they have multiple regions, right? And their region is actually a collection of data centers, and which are actually co-located very close to each other, right? So they say that for all practical purposes, even though this region could have 3 different data centers, because the inter latency between these data centers is less than 1 millisecond, you can kind of imagine a region to be a single data center itself, right? And within that single region, right? So or for practical purposes, within the single data center, this is how the configuration is. You have one database tier, right? So which actually hosts all the shards, right? So the idea is the complete data, right? Like the entire 20 petabytes of data is actually hosted by this particular MySQL tier that's present in that particular region, right? So the region is completely self-sufficient. And then on top of it, like as we saw, we have 2 layers of caches. right? So one layer, the one that sits right above the database is the leader cache, right? So where, you know, there is a representation for every single shard, right? In the every single shard in the database has a representation in the leader cache, right? And then on top of it, we have this vertically partitioned follower tiers, where each follower tier is again completely self-sufficient to handle any requests that's coming for any shard, right? So if we actually kind of and then we have the clients, right? So one set of, so it's, so here the way this diagram they represent, the clients can actually kind of contact either here or here, but the more usual deployment is more like this, where, you know, like, so each follower tier kind of corresponds to one front-end web cluster, and it's usually in normal scenarios, you know, where there is no failure, that particular web cluster will always contact the follower, its primary follower tier, right? So that's how the deployment is. And so we have okay, so why is this deployment important, right? So why does every region has to be self-sufficient in terms of all the data with respect to the actual database layer? So that's because, you know, we want to make sure that the reads, you know, in almost most of these scenarios, right, and even in most of failure scenarios, we want to make sure that the reads do not cross region boundaries, right? So that's why we have the complete data, you know, in a particular region, and then we have the leader cache and the follower tiers above it, right? And then so there is also, so this actually talks about how one region is represented, right? Now if we actually take the concept of a shard, right, the shard will actually have a master copy in one region, and then the shard will have the slave copies of the shard will exist in other regions. So that's, so for every shard, there'll always be a master region, and then the leader cache of that master region, of that particular master region where the shard exists. So that will be like the leader for that particular shard, right? So it'll host the leader, or it'll host the main copy of that particular shard, right? And you'll also have the slave versions for that particular shard.
And how is that decided? Which will be the master for that particular?
Yes, deciding which one should be the master. So they don't actually talk
Which region
about,
should,
which region, right? They don't actually specifically talk about. I think one thing that they kind of say is, you know, like there is no specific association of objects to regions, because Facebook data is extremely heavily interconnected. They don't associate users, you know, a regional profile to where the master should be. But there is one clue that they kind of tell in the paper. There's one line in the paper that kind of mentions that, you know, as much as possible, they want all the shards, all the master shards, all the master databases, you know, like to be clustered in a single region. So they kind of try to follow that particular pattern. Need not happen always, because we'll see in the failover scenario, right? So you'll always have to promote a slave as a master, right? So in that case, you actually break it, right? So because, you know, like if you have all your master instances of the shard in one specific region, right? If there is a failover, so if, let's say, you know, the specific node hosting a set of shards actually failed, so then you would have to promote one of the nodes in the slave region that hosts those shards to be the new master, right? So now the master kind of gets split across regions, right? But that's fine. That's actually fine, because that's only a failover kind of a scenario, right? But in normal scenario, they kind of hint that, you know, like for all practical purposes, they want to keep the master databases intact in one shard, and then the other shards should be the slave shards.
So, so one thing, so what is the role of master here? Because I'm assuming that a write for a particular region will go to the shard in that region, right? Even though it will go to that shard first, even though it might be a slave, right?
So okay, I think that's a perfect question. So the master exactly serves that purpose, in the sense that, you know, like, so if you guys remember, right? So in DDA we talk about 3 different replication strategies, right? So where you actually have a master slave, or you actually have a multi-leader, or you actually have a leaderless replication strategy, right? So here that master basically is they follow the single leader and then multiple slave configuration, where the writes have to go to the master.
So, but then the writes will go across region, right? Because
Yes, and they are okay with it. They are okay with it because they are trying. It's a heavily read optimized system, right? So they are okay with the fact that a write can originate in a region where the master where the master database is not there for that particular shard. So they would have to send that request synchronously over to the region where the master database exists, and then it actually succeeds over there, and then the update comes back to the slave region, and then it propagates all the way back to the client. Yes, and they are okay with it because as you guys remember, right? So the one thing that we really want to make sure is we want to make sure that the reads are as much as possible from the same region, right? For the writes, they have to take the hit. Yes.
okay.
And we'll see that detailed in the workflow. Yeah.
I guess writes would be replicated async, right?
So the writes would be replicated async, yes. To the replicas, it is async. But if the write originates in a region where there is only the slave database, right? So for that, that the call from that particular, we'll see how that actually whole thing works in a diagram. Just few slides below. But it still has to, synchronously, the call has to go to the region where the actual master database is, and then the write to the master database, at least the write to the master database has to be done synchronously. The replication to slaves can be done asynchronously, and they do it asynchronously, yes. But the write to the master database always has to be done synchronously, yes.
Okay.
Right, so this is basically, this diagram is a representation of a single region, right? So, and similarly, you will have multiple regions, and concept-wise, a shard, any of these regions can be the master for a particular shard. The master database instance can reside in any of these regions, even though they try to co-locate all the master database instances in a single region. Right. Okay, so now let's look at some of the interesting parts, right? So so I have three different workflows that probably we can look at, right? So what happens on a read, right? So the read, let's say the read originates in this specific case from front-end cluster 1, right? So one of the servers from the front-end cluster 1, and because it's nearest tier, so it's usually configured what the nearest to it is, right? So there is always a primary tier. It's we can actually, the paper talks about each cluster is actually configured with what is your primary follower tier, and if the follower tier is not available, what is a secondary follower tier, right? So in this case, the nearest one is probably the primary, so it contacts the nearest follower tier, for a read request for a particular key, and the shard always exists, right? All shards exist in all cache tiers, right? So it's just the number of keys that exist in that particular shard varies across the different follower tiers. So let's say there is a hit, we don't have to worry about anything, we simply return. There is a miss, then we go to the leader tier. Right, and there is a shard that exists for this particular for the particular shard in question now. So if the so usually hits to the leader tier directly goes to the database, but let's say it's one of the hard keys where just before this particular request came in, the follower tier 2 actually made the exact same request for that particular key. So in which case the leader tier would actually find in its own shard cache that it actually has it and it would return. But if there is a miss, it actually goes to the database, it accesses the database, returns it, and goes back, and that's it. So this is the successful read path.
There was a concept of request convergence or something like that, wherein leader would wait. There was some concept in DDIA, right?
So this is just a read. Yes, this is just a read of the values, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is just the when you have a read, you just consult layer by layer. It goes to the follower tier. If it's not there, you go to the leader tier, right? So the leader tier's job is the one, either it has it because it just received the same request from a different follower tier, so it has it in its LRV cache, it returns it, or it goes to the master, it goes to the DB tier, and then it basically fetches the data. And this is irrespective of whether this particular region is actually a master or a slave for that particular shard. So this particular workflow is exactly the same. The one exception to this particular read path, right, is on a failover scenario, right? So let's say if this follower tier is not able to contact, the node that hosts that particular shard in the leader cache, right? So then it directly issues the database read query, and then it basically fetches from there. So that's one failover scenario that actually, in terms of the, what happens if the node that hosts the shard in the leader tier is down, right? So in that case, the follower tier can directly issue the query into the database rather than going through the leader. And as I said, so this is the same path that we'll follow, whether, because this request is for a particular key in a particular shard, right? So whether this particular region contains the master database for the shard, or whether it contains it's a slave region for that particular shard, irrespective of that, the read path is exactly the same. You guys are okay with it, right? It's pretty simple. There is no invalidation. There is nothing. There is kind of nothing. So we saw about what happens if the leader tier failed, right? So when the leader tier, the node that hosts the shard in the leader tier, when it's not able to access it, right? So it directly issues the query, right? So that's the failover that happens, when one of the nodes in the leader tier that's supposed to take the request is not available. What happens if the node that is supposed to take the request for this particular shard, if the follower tier fails, right? As I initially mentioned, each front-end cluster is configured with a primary follower tier and a secondary follower tier, right? So if it cannot contact that node in the primary follower tier, it contacts the node in the secondary follower tier, and everything else remains the same. Because each follower tier, as we know, is a complete cache subsystem by itself for all the shards, right? So it simply, like fails over to the next follower tier that's configured to, and it basically gets the request from there. It satisfies the request. So far, so in this read path, right, there is no crossing of regions, right? So whether this is a slave region for the shard or whether this is a master region for the shard, we don't actually cross the regions at all, right? Like, so we just and even if the leader fails, we are okay with it. Even if the follower fails, we are actually okay with it, right? So because we simply, within the region itself, if leader fails, we simply contact the DB tier, so which is in the same region. If the follower fails, we simply contact another follower tier, which is also in the same region.
But if DB fails, then
yeah, I know this question was coming. So okay, so what happens? Yeah, so what happens if the particular database fails, right? So I think that is one case, right? Like, so if that particular database failed, then what would happen is the leader would still have to make that call. So we are talking about a scenario where there is a cache miss in the follower tier 1. There is a cache miss in the leader tier 1, and then there is a failure for that particular corresponding database instance that hosts that particular shard, right? So in that specific case, there is no other choice for this particular, because the data is not available, right? So this leader still has to make that inter-regional read, right? So the thing is, the follower tier failure we are able to handle within the region. The leader tier failure, nodes and the leader tier failure, we are able to handle with the region. But as you foresaw, there's one failure, which is the database node, and and a very specific sequence, right? So the miss in the first cache, miss in the second cache, and the database node that hosts fail. In that case, there's no other option, right? So yeah, it's a best case effort to make sure that all my reads are contained within the region. But there are scenarios, as you mentioned, what happens if everything was a miss? I still want to contact the database is not there. I have to actually, the leader will try to contact the database. It's always the leader that satisfies the request. So the leader will try to contact the database. If he figures out that the node is not there, he would issue the request to the slave region, to the leader in the slave region, and the leader in the slave region would be able to contact either its own cache, if if it has the shard and the key in its cache, or it will look at the slave database and get the data from it. Yes. That's one scenario that we cannot avoid in this whole architecture, where the read still has to, it's still a failure scenario, but not all failure scenarios. One failure scenario where we still have to go across regions. Perfect. As I said, I saw the question coming, and then right. So that's That's amazing. So, okay, so now let's look at the write workflow one, right? So we saw the read workflow one. So the write workflow is a little bit different depending upon where the write originates, right? So we have two different cases, because the first case that I have here is where the write actually happens from the region where the master shard resides. Right. So in which case, so what is going to happen is like, let's say the write is coming into the follower tier 1, and then the write gets forwarded into the leader tier. And then the leader tier would actually do the synchronous update to the database. The database synchronously replies to the leader that the write is okay. The leader does a couple of things now, right? So the leader synchronously sends the change set to the follower tier that originated this particular write request. So that update is made synchronously, right? And it asynchronously starts sending invalidate messages to all the other follower tiers in this specific region, right? So, which means the lead, so by doing this synchronous update to where it originated, right? And then by doing this asynchronous updates, invalidation updates to all the other follower tiers, all the cache tiers, the leader tier is automatically updated, right? Because the write went through it, and then when the database said okay, right? Like, so if it probably had that particular value, it updates it, and then but the follower tiers are completely taken care of, right? So either they're invalidated, or it is the originating follower tier gets synchronously updated, and it after that only it says okay to the client that the read is successful. So can you guys kind of guess why that originating follower tier is updated synchronously rather than like sending a synchronous update to it?
For read your own writes.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's how they are able to establish the read after write consistency. Which
so
yeah.
Then we should not say read after write, right? We should say read your own writes, because because other follower, we are updating them asynchronously. So probably my write might have been successful, but if my friend is reading, he might not see my write, because that follower tier is updating asynchronously. Right.
I think, yeah, yes. You're correct. I think the book refers to, DDA refers to this as read your own writes, right? Right. So, but in the paper, they refer to it read after write consistency. So the assumption is like, so the thing is like, so the write came from, like as you said, the client one did the write, right? From the web server cluster one, right? So only as of now, only the client one knows about the write, right? So if the client one reads after that write, right? So he's the only one who's aware of that write because he issued the write. So when he reads it, he'll always get that that the value that he wrote, right? So let's say there is a same client too who's kind of trying to write to it, but he's actually in the second cluster, right? So even if he doesn't get, because of the because of this asynchronous this thing, right? So let's say he's trying to read, not write. He's trying to read, right? So even if he doesn't see the updated value, it's okay because he's not aware of that write in the first place. But the guy who's aware of the write knows the gets the latest value.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, but I see your point, right? So it's like the instead of saying read after write, if you say read your own writes, it's even more suitable for this case. Yeah.
And the replication within the database is asynchronous or synchronous?
Yes, yeah. So we are coming to that, right? So so far we have seen what happens to the write, how it goes to the database, and what happens in the synchronous flow. And there is one async flow we saw where the invalidation of the messages happen, right? The question which Abhishek posted is, like what happened? Okay, so this is all happening in the master region, well and good, right? But we know the exact same data also exists both in the cache and in the database in the slave region for this particular shard. So what happens to that, right? Yes. So that that replication, actually they use MySQL binlog, right? So which MySQL uses for its replication stream. They use that. It's done asynchronously, and they do a couple of things, right? Because you not only have to update the DB tier, you also have to update the cache tier, right? So they do it in two steps, in the sense that they first update the DB tier and make sure that the DB tier is updated with the latest writes, right? So then they send the they call it as a cache consistency messages. They send it to the leader tier, and then the leader tier would be able to send it to the follower tiers. Yeah. So all this happens asynchronously in the other region.
So one question, like regarding this cache consistency messages, are those more like invalidation of caches, or this is more like trying to bring the cache in sync with DB?
There are two types of cache consistency messages, right? So the one that we saw in the slave region, they are invalidation messages, but I think the one that we saw in the synchronous one, so they are actually sending the chain set.
So you mean on the right hand side it's the chain set versus
so on the left hand side is the chain set, right? On the left hand side, only for the originating follower tier, it's the chain set, and on the right hand side, I believe it's the invalidation messages.
Right, because it just depends upon like the payload that they have to synchronize. Right, it might be more easier to invalidate as opposed to try to resync it out. So maybe resync works better. Invalidation works better than try to bring it up to speed and let it kind of fall through, from the request coming into leader back to database and so on, if need be.
Yes, and also the other case that they don't know, right? Like, so they don't know whether this particular, let's say this particular key that exists in shard1, right? So let's say there are few, 5 follower tiers, right? So they don't know whether, first of all, those follower tiers even have the data cached in them.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Right. So yeah, instead of sending that entire chain set as over the network, they simply have invalidation messages sent, and then if the cache has it, then it invalidates it. If it not, then it then it's fine. Then it's a no. Right. So you guys get the whole right workflow one, right? So this is workflow one, where we start talking about what happens to the entire flow when the write originates in the region where the master database for that particular shard is present. So the last write workflow, right? So it's basically like what happens if the write, instead of originating where the master shard is, it originates where the slave shard is, right? So we see this client C2 that basically where the write to the shard happens. And one thing, if you guys note, right? So I think I've written it down, right? So if you guys noted, so that small box with all these like with all these jail kind of thing that we see over here, right? It's basically a shard, right? I just represented a shard there. So that shard in all these boxes, it's exactly the same shard. Right, so all those lined boxes that we see inside all these bigger rectangular boxes, right? So it's basically just that one single shard is present in all these different tiers. Almost in every single tier it's present. Right, so I mean, it at least it helped me to visualize it better.
What do you mean by same? Like,
no, so that particular, let's say this is a shard with an ID C123, right? So that C123 is actually present here. The C123 is present here. C123 is present in the leader tier in the master region. It's also present in the database instance in the master DB. It's also present in that particular C123 shard, right? So that shard exists in all these different cache layers, in almost every single cache layer, and also in the master and the slave regions.
But like you mentioned, right, that for each one cache might be different. So
right, so the shard, right? So it's so the keys that are there in that shard might differ, but that shard is just a logical grouping of keys and objects and associations, right? So yeah. Let's say so the shard exists, but what keys exist in that shard in each of these caches could be different. Yes. Okay. The chart is nothing but a logical grouping, right? Like, so you of objects and associations, right? So the chart exists everywhere, but of course, yes, what is cached for that particular chart, right? What data in the chart is being cached in each of these layers, that's different, except for the database layer, right? The database layer, they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
Right. So okay, so given that fact, let's quickly run through this write workflow, right? So the write workflow now originates in the slave shard, right? So it originates at the slave shard, and then it actually goes into the follower, and the follower always forwards a write to the slave, right? So all writes go to the single slave tier, right? And the node that hosts that particular shard in that slave tier, it knows that it's actually that particular shard, it is the slave region, right? So what it does is you can actually see this purple arrow going from the slave leader to the master leader, right? So the write is synchronously forwarded over here, and then the write actually happens from here to the master DB. Right, so it basically goes through here, and then it goes across region to the master leader. So from the master leader, it goes into the master DB, and then the master DB writes it. So this is where the actual source of truth gets committed. So right, and then it actually okays to the specific master leader, and then the master leader synchronously replies okay to the slave leader. All right, and then the slave leader does something very similar to what the what the previous workflows are, right? So it synchronously updates the follower from where the write originated, right? So that's to ensure the read after write consistency. It does async invalidations to all the other followers, right? And then the same thing also happens at the master leader, because this write came through the master leader. Once it synchronously forwarded the OK success message to the slave leader, it actually sends asynchronous updates to the follower tiers.
So what will happen if, let's say, the slave leader is not able to talk to the master leader on the side? Will this change not be saved?
The slave leader is not available. So
it's not able to talk to, like, for example, here we have a synchronous communication going right from slave leader to master leader.
Yes.
For whatever reason, let's say there's a partition going on and now you're not able to talk to it. Then I would assume either that change would not get committed, as
yes,
in.
Yes, I think yeah. So in this specific case, if you're assuming that the communication between the master and the slave itself doesn't exist, right? So then it would be a write failure.
Right. Yeah, because that means nothing will go into the FW tier at all, right? As in this change was not even taken in.
Yes.
And then what's the reason for this to come into slave shard? Is it because there was something happened on the master shard to begin with, or
which one? What is the reason
for this to come into slave shard to begin with?
So that's because so the cluster, right? So like the front end cluster where this write originated, right? So that is actually that's coming from a slave region. So that particular web server that's actually taking that request, right? It's actually in the slave region.
Okay, so what that means, like from a write perspective, it can either go to the master region or the slave region, as opposed to just going to the master.
Yes.
So
it can actually go. And conceptually also they say that like a specific region can be a master for some of the shards and it can be slave for some of the other shards. So you guys are clear with this write workflow, right? It's almost the same. It's just that there is this inter-region communication that happens because the write originated in the slave region, so it synchronously has to do this, and they're actually perfectly okay with this because because they kind of are optimizing for the reads, where we saw like that one single scenario, right? Like so where there was a cache miss and then the database itself isn't available, so like it has to do across the region read, right? So other than that, most of the failure scenarios for a read and normal scenarios for a read are served within the region itself. For the write, I think I'm not sure how many. I mean, I don't think I saw any data related to how many cross-region calls they had to make, but they actually have data related to what is the latency for this, and it's actually in the order of 100 milliseconds plus something. Right? So even when the write actually synchronously goes across regions and comes back. Right? So I think they term, so if I remember the numbers correctly, so a synchronous write that is originating on the master region takes somewhere around 15 to 20 milliseconds, whereas a write that actually originates on the slave region takes that 15 to 20 seconds. In addition, it also takes a 50 millisecond, sorry, not seconds, so milliseconds. It also takes a 50 millisecond inter-regional communication latency. So that I think the total is like like somewhere around 100 milliseconds, for the writes that happen across the regions.
So what is the underlying product or that is used to build these FW and leader caches?
Oh yeah, so I think we probably won't see a lot, at least like in my presentation, but the paper kind of talks about it, right? It's just they don't use like specific memcache kind of thing. These are just cache nodes, like where they have implemented the cache, like in memory. They talk about how they maintain. It's their custom implementation of cache servers that run in each of these nodes. The paper kind of details about how they maintain multiple different slabs, and then it also kind of talks about like how they have thread safe hash maps to maintain the key value nature of the data, and it's basically their own essential server implementation that
It's not like Redis or Memcache or Hazelcache.
no, it's not.
So
It used to be Memcache before, yes, but now they replaced it with their own cache layer.
So in this architecture, like they have a master and a slave DB going on, right? What if that would have been a master and a master? How would that have changed? Would it be much better as opposed to making it worse?
I think one of the primary reasons to have master leader replication versus a master is they can't guarantee that read after write consistency, right? They kind of talk about it in the end, where they say, like one of the reasons why they diverged from, because that incident is okay. So a master is almost similar to saying that, like you have a leader list, right? So similar in terms of or let's just consider a master, right? So the problem with a master is you would accept writes in both the masters, and then you would have to deal with conflict resolution. Right? I think that's one thing that they very clearly say that they don't want to deal with, right? Like, so they said, like by having the single leader stuff, like we don't have to worry about the intricacies of, how do I resolve conflicts, but we are okay to go across regions and take the writes. So we are okay with that small incremental latency for the flexibility or for the power of not having to deal with conflicts.
Yeah, I think that is what I was just trying to kind of get the same answer, because that's what I think, especially most of the times you don't have master just because of the overhead of solving conflict is difficult. Especially where they're across regions. So you have to use certain, I guess, good way of conflict resolution. Time doesn't work, right? Time is not consistent across both,
right,
or some other mechanisms. And doing this way, of course, you take a hit where the slave has to now talk to the leader on the left hand side to make an insert, versus the slave leader could have just talked to his local and then let the slave and master figure out the resolution of it. But I think this simplifies the overall architecture in terms of how the information data flows from kind of the left towards the right. But
sure, yeah, I agree. Yes. Yeah. So okay, so I think this kind of almost concludes what we wanted to see, right? Like, so we kind of see the we went over a recap. So just to summarize what we have seen so far, right? We went over a recap of like what the graph data is, and why this is very, very essential. And this sits at the backbone of the entire Facebook architecture, because every Facebook page rendering has to go through this Tavo, right? Like, and why is this like a heavily read-oriented cache system? Like they said, like we have to maintain a cache hit ratio of greater than 90%, and their results actually show they actually have more than 94% of cache hit ratio, right? So and there is also a table in the end that kind of talks about like 99.8% of the requests are read requests, right? So on the write request is just 0.2%, right? So that's the kind of skew that we actually see in terms of this is a read. So and how, and as we already know, right? Like, so, and like how do you build a read-oriented system, right? You increase the cache, right? So increase the number of nodes where the data gets cached, and they're doing exactly the same. And but they have specific specific nice architectural ways they build it, having a single leader, having multiple levels of caches, making sure to have their writes being streamlined at the leader cache levels. And like the entire architecture finally focuses on how can I not do these across regional calls for reads, right? Except for that one small difficult failure scenario where they don't have an option, right? So, and we saw how the write happens. I think we have already discussed this failover scenario, right? Like, so you look at the first red over there, like, so every this particular front-end cluster is always configured with what its primary follower tier is and what its secondary follower tier. So if it cannot contact the primary tier, you can see the green arrow where it contacts the secondary, right? So that ends it. But if there is a miss over here, right? So in the read, like where it cannot, the follower tier cannot contact that particular leader node that hosts the shard, then it directly goes and reads the database, right? Like, so it's just a read, so it directly goes and reads the database. It's only when, like when the node is down, so which is okay. So we're still within the region, right? The only case, I think Abhishek got this actually, right? So, like where you when what happens if your database fails and then you have to access the database, right? So then that particular leader tier goes across the region, it goes to the leader cache in the second, whatever the other region is, right? So, and then it basically fetches from there. So that's one.
Maybe my
Yeah.
Johnny, maybe my doubt seems to be a bit weird, but it seems to be a monolithic kind of a scaling. We are scaling the complete box, right, for the replication. So that kind of a doubt is there. So the master data center is at, the same box is replicated in a way. Since we are using distributed cache, so it should have that availability option there itself.
No, so
we discussed it. Yeah.
each of the nodes can independently each of those layers can independently be scaled, right? Like, so because the one thing that we kind of didn't talk about is, like how, like, let's say at least in the cache layer, right? Like how are these shards being assigned to nodes, right? They use actually a consistent hashing ring for that, and that's independent of how it is in the master and how it is in the slave, right? So that shard, like the grouping of a specific set of shards to a specific node, right? So that they use consistent hashing. They kind of mentioned that they use consistent hashing for that, right? So you can independently scale each of these layers by adding new nodes in these layers. It's
So
just
at
going
the same time, we would be adding that node in the replica data center as
not
well.
necessarily, right? Not necessarily. You don't have to. If you only want, for some reason you only want to add it to, let's say because your leader cache in like in region 1 is actually getting hot, right? So you can simply add that node to the leader cache in the master region where it's kind of where it's needed, and then that leader cache would probably take a subset of shards.
Okay, but the thing is, we are doing synchronization between this master data center and replica data center. So at least their space should be of same size. So if we are adding anything on the master side, it should be added in the replica.
Yeah, the synchronization is just that, like that it's just the data, right? So the one thing is like I think we have to differentiate what's happened at the database layer and at the cache layer, right? So that is one thing. But like the same data, even when it is present over here and when it is present over there, right? It need not, the way the shards are present there, but the assignment of shards to nodes need not be the same, right? You could, like, node 1 in master region can actually have 3 shards, and node 1 in the slave region like can actually only have 2 shards, and the shard 3 can actually be in node 2, right? That doesn't affect so the node 1, when it says to when it contacts the leader region, right? So it wouldn't say that, go and update node 2, right? It simply say, update this particular shard, right? Like, so with this particular key, right? So and there would always be a mapping. Like if it is a consistent hashing, there'll always be a mapping as to, in that particular layer that update has to happen, where does that shard belong to, right? So there'll always be a mapping that we would maintain, and that mapping will tell us which node to go and access.
Yeah,
right? So
sorry. As a matter of fact, like, it should just be based on the key, right? Because at the end of the day, the key is going to be mapped to a shard, so you can just figure it out.
Yes.
So you don't have to. Yeah. So I mean, I would think ideally, perhaps you want to have same things on the left, same things on the right, but depending on some of the situation, how the data is divided across data centers, you could definitely have different capacities. But at the end of the day, the same data will be there in both, right? It's just that the number of nodes and how the server is going to be different.
Yeah.
Okay.
So okay, so yeah, I think just to conclude, right? So we are kind of reaching the time limit. So, but I think we dealt with all the main workflows, right? So we kind of saw what happens in the read workflows. We kind of what happens in the write workflows. We also saw what happens in the during the read failover, right? So there are a little bit of information, like where they talk about what happens, like when the main database fails, like how do you do the failover? right? Like for example, if your master database instance fails, right? So then you actually promote one of your slaves to be a master, right? So that's something that has to be done. So I think that's the only place where they do a promotion, because you don't have a choice. But in all the other cases, they somehow they kind of handle it using other mechanisms where they don't actually have to do a failover, but it's kind of handled. Like let's say, for example, if you're not able to communicate to a follower tier, right? Like, so then we saw that in the read case, it always has a secondary tier where it goes, right? And also when a node in the follower tier is actually down, right? So then the cache invalidation messages that needs to be applied to it, right? So they kind of store it in a different place. So that's why I kind of wrote over here saying that, the common theme that they have for this failure detection that we keep seeing in multiple failure scenarios is, like whatever, when a particular node that hosts, let's say, a few shards are down, there will always be these cache invalidation messages and other, let's say, I think it's mostly the cache invalidation messages, right? So, or even replication messages if we are talking about the database. So they'll always be there, but they wouldn't have been applied to these nodes that went down, right? So the main theme is, when the nodes are repaired and then they come back, right? We would have to make sure that before they become operational, they get delivered the actual, because they actually host the shards, right? So we have to make sure that all the invalidation messages are being applied before they actually come back online again. I think that's one of the common theme that actually we see over here. Yeah, so they talk about a lot of these, what happens, if these messages fail, then how do we take care of it? They do something like, like if the invalidation messages are not being able to deliver to the follower node, they queue it into the disk, right? So, and then they're able to deliver it when it comes back again. So, okay, so finally to conclude, right? So whatever they built it, and I think the way it is being used is exactly the same. So you have 99.8% of your requests being read, and that's what we built our system for. And then you have very small writes, and it's basically I think almost in the tune of 500:1. And the three main things that the paper kind of talks about is, like very specific workload where the reads dominate so much, and read availability and read latency should be really high. So that's one big issue, right? And also the underlying nature of what the social graph is, right? So what is being served, and then they describe this nice object and association API that they came up with, that's both implemented as tables in the MySQL database and also implemented as association lists and objects in the cache tier, right? So that's the abstraction. They actually came up with this abstraction even before they built Tower. Even for their previous memcache systems, they had this object and association layer. And finally, of course, the how are they even able to maintain this billion read requests per second kind of high read throughput, right? Like, so and how can they do it in very highly available and very highly performant system? And I think it still sits in the center of Facebook's infrastructure. And just to give a context, so there is an article and there's a paper which actually talks about how they scaled Memcache, which is actually their previous architecture. But it's a very nice read because they talk a lot about cache invalidations and stuff. It's a little bit more easier here because of the single leader. So there it's a little bit different in the initial architecture. So I think it's a good read, and I think you guys also could read upon their next distributed graph query engine called Dragon, which they built on top of Tower. But Tower, if you guys look at the actual APIs of Tower, it's built very simply to handle a very small subset of queries, right? So in order to actually handle much more complicated queries with indexes and stuff like that, they built a system on top of Tower, which is called Dragon, and I think it's a good read. I haven't read it so far, but I think I'm kind of planning to do it sometime.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really awesome presentation, Johnny. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Yeah.
Yes, obviously. So DDIA is complete. Johnny, actually, I was not able to follow it nicely. Maybe next book I would try to.
Yeah, I think so I think this is outside of SD skills, but yeah, so we so today we finished today we finished.
Hello.
Hello?
Yeah, we cannot hear him.
Maybe connection. Yeah, okay, I think we are almost done, right?
Right.
Okay, I'll just stop recording. So maybe he'll come back. Wait for a couple of minutes.